This is I'm very happy to begin this series of interviews for the Global China Research Center here at University of Exeter. It's the first time we do this, and we plan to have a series of interviews to showcase some of the most recent articles and books published about Chinese politics and Chinese foreign policy. I am Andrea Ghiselli. I'm a lecturer in international politics at the University of Exeter. Here with me there is Caice, which is my partner in crime, doing his PhD here. And then we're very happy today. We have one of the authors of one of the, I think, most interesting articles I've read this year on Chinese foreign politics. So today we have Professor Jaehwan Lim. He's a professor at the Gakuin, at the Department of International Politics at Aoyama Gakuin University. He completed his PhD in political science at the University of Tokyo and pursued graduate studies at New York University. He specializes in Chinese politics with a particular interest in elite politics and civil-military relations. Professor Lim published a number of papers. Later on, once this video is online, we will include a link to his profile. And today he will be talking with us about an article that was published very recently. As a matter of fact, I don't think it has any volume or issue number yet, in the Journal of Contemporary China. So one of the most important journals in the field of contemporary Chinese studies. And the article is co-authored with Ito Asei at the University of Tokyo and Zhang Hongying, which he's a senior fellow at the Research Institute of Economy, Trade and Industry. The title of the paper is Unpacking China's Wolf Warrior Diplomacy, a Text-Based Data Approach. So today's interview will be pretty simple. We will ask Professor Lim about the content of his work, the implications, and then if he has any additional comment or suggestion that he has, any insights or any lesson learned as he and his co-authors were writing this very interesting paper. So Professor Lim, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. We will go straight into the questions. Could you give us an outline of the content of your article?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. So I am speaking on behalf of the co-authors, Professor Ase Ito at the University of Tokyo and Dr. Zhang at the Rieti Institute. So so this article, the title, "The Unpacking with Warrior Diplomacy," is simply so about the understanding, understanding the developments, particularly discursive developments with warrior diplomacy. So we are using the data set of the Chinese Foreign Ministry first conference. So to test to use some text analysis methods, to understand particularly the timeline, the chronological trajectory of wolf warrior diplomacy, and also we were aiming to understand the potential drivers of this discursive development. So what is actually the driving the emergence and also decline of wolf warrior diplomacy? So the major findings, one of the major findings is that simply there was a substantial change. There did exist wolf warrior diplomacy. I mean, so the sudden adoption of Chinese diplomats, using combative confrontational language. So our data indicated that there was a substantial change in diplomatic tone, towards a very combative and confrontational direction. And it started, I mean, approximately in the latter part of 2018, and then it got adjusted in starting in 2022, according to our data. So So that's our kind of very simple understanding, our finding about the developments of wolf warrior diplomacy. But we further use the data set to kind of pinpoint, okay, the initiation, the timing of the initiation and adjustment of wolf warrior diplomacy. So we applied this text analysis method, change points analysis, okay, against the sentiment scores. To find that there were three points in time where we can find some fundamental, some structural change in the properties of the data. Okay, so which consists of three points in times. The first point is 2019. Okay, July 2019, and February 2020, and September 2022. So the trajectory is that the tone gets shifted towards the negative, okay, starting from our data, okay, July 2019, and it further intensified. Okay, the negative tone further intensified, okay, after the February 2020, and then it started to moderate, okay, after 2022. Okay, the September 2022. So that was the second finding of the exact timeline of wolf warrior diplomacy, the timing of the initiation and adjustment, okay, of the diplomatic tone. So that's the second finding. The third finding is that we also used the kind of another text analysis method, text regression, okay, to understand what kind of words, what kind of actually specific expressions, okay, are characterizing, okay, the wolf warrior diplomacy. So we want to specify kind of wolf warrior diplomacy, WWD words, okay, indicative and predictive of wolf warrior diplomacy. So our finding is that some specific words like responsibility for crime, or discredit, or blacken, or ideology. So those terms are pretty predictive. Okay, in more statistical terms, they contribute a lot more, okay, to the emergence, okay, of wolf warrior diplomacy. So those are the major findings of our article. And then the implication of the timing is that we are not. There's a caveat. So I need to talk about, because we were aiming to kind of establish a causality, okay, between our findings and then the driver of wolf warrior diplomacy, but it didn't work very well because I will talk about the reason why we were kind of unable to establish a causality between the timing and the drivers. But our findings actually strongly indicate that the driver of wolf warrior diplomacy is actually is mostly from the parties or Xi Jinping himself, like a strengthened, more forceful intervention in foreign affairs, particularly what the behaviors of diplomats, okay, in the Chinese foreign policy, Chinese foreign ministry, okay. So particularly, he actually used at the timing of the initiation of before the initiation of WWD, he used this very coercive and forceful method, okay, like appointments of this like diplomatic novice and a total outsider, right? So who has no experience in foreign affairs into the party, the secretary position, okay, of the foreign ministry. That was quite, I think, from the Xi Jinping's perspective, that did work, right? To change or to send a signal, very strong signal to the diplomatic corps, okay, and also, he started more forceful way, okay, the anti-corruption campaign within the foreign ministry. So, and then he actually continued throughout the year. So, and I think this anti-corruption campaign conducted within the foreign ministry actually contributed to the second sort of, the time, okay, the intensification of the diplomatic tone, or it's more, contribute the assertion of diplomatic tone in the second timing. And then he also was trying to okay, Xi Jinping intervenes in the moderation of diplomatic tone. So the studies actually indicate that the timing was actually 2021. Okay, there was this what is the collective study was the study meeting, okay, of the Politburo. Okay, so Politburo actually issued and invited this the scholar, and then he issued and then sent a very clear signal to it's time to not stop, but it's time to moderate. Okay, the combative sort of use of language. Okay, by the diplomats. But actually, there was a time lag. So after our finding actually indicates that there was a time lag. Okay, so so between this collective Politburo meeting and actual moderation of the diplomatic tone of the the foreign ministry spokespersons. Okay, so I think that strongly indicates, okay, strongly suggests that the the strongest driver, the main driver of Wolf Warrior diplomacy actually stems from the parties, Xi Jinping himself's forceful interference of foreign affairs. Okay, so those are, I think, is the most important implication of our finding. Okay.
Excellent. So I had actually a couple of questions, and then of course we can move to also discuss about the methodology, which I find it very interesting. And I remember reading the paper, really appreciated how you also essentially try to confirm the robustness of your findings using also some other existing data sets from other scholars that have studied this topic. But I want to ask you kind of to tease out a bit more again the implications and where we're finding. One was quite interesting. The predictors, the word that can predict the kind of world forward diplomacy, they were not really associated with specific policy issues. So it seemed really more like a political reaction something some political factor rather than a real change in China's foreign policy priority or greater, let's say, practical assertiveness. So I was wondering whether what you make of it. Of course, unfortunately we cannot interview Zhao Lijian or other Chinese diplomats to ask them directly, so can only speculate. But I was wondering what you made of it. And then the other question was about again the relationship then between the Chinese foreign ministry and the leadership, right? We had talks about the rise of the MFA, for example, especially after many years of decline, which again, it's always it's usually studied looking at the ranking of the foreign minister. So you kind of describe this as a reaction to a push by the central leadership to enforce discipline, as you mentioned, and central inspection team and so on. So if you could talk a bit more about these two issues.
That's right. Okay, so that's the third. Our finding is that the specific words characteristic of forward diplomacy is not actually associated with the Xi Jinping's foreign policy agenda, right? So or kind of words representative of 2010s, right? Which has been summarized or which has been kind of considered as how can I say the words representing the Chinese new assertiveness, right? So because like core interest or sovereignty or territorial issues, where they are not words characteristic or indicative for in our statistical models predictive of the emergence and intensification of forward diplomacy. So what does that indicate? What does that suggest? That is in the realm of interpretation, but our kind of understanding. So my take on that issue is that this is of course an how can I say basically a response, okay, to foreign criticisms, right? So from the Chinese perspective, foreign perceived sort of, unfounded, okay, foreign criticisms against the Chinese foreign policy behaviors. So, but I don't think it's just a, it's a reaction, okay, to foreign kind of pressures, because we can see other some words that is, that is not very characteristic of Chinese diplomacy, right? So ideology, right? So now, they are using the language of some different language. They are adopting different vocabulary, okay, that is distinguished from the previous eras, right? Ideology, and also Xinjiang and Hong Kong issues also, coming into the WWT vocabulary. So, and I think that means that the Chinese diplomats are increasingly find themselves in a very different, semantic, okay, at least the semantic environment, okay. So now they are gaining new sort of, set of words, okay, and some of the words are kind of pressure to them, okay, to use, okay, by the political leadership sometimes. But probably some of the words are representing their own organizational, changing organizational preferences or individual interest of the, like edge diplomats. But I think it's also it's important to kind of recognize that with warrior diplomacy is basically a response to foreign criticisms, right? Particularly on the pandemic period, but also but at the same time, we need to recognize that there are new words, okay, emerging from sort of, Chinese interactions, okay, in the latter part of the 2010s, which I think we need to kind of, bring new attention to those new set of vocabulary, because this is going to be a also predictor, right, for what will be coming, right? So we do not know, with forward, but this kind of a combative, confrontational use of language, diplomatic language, okay, will be coming again. Okay, so so I think that's that's one of the contributions, okay, of our findings to the literature of Chinese diplomacy and foreign policy. And then when it comes to Xi Jinping's relationship, the relationship between Xi Jinping and the foreign policy ministry, right? So as you mentioned, the MFA has been, according to some research, has been marginalized, right? So I mean, despite their ostensibly elevated institutional status, because they're like was that the foreign minister, okay, they came into the power bureau position. Okay, but despite that, I think the foreign ministry, MFA itself, organizationally has been. They feel that they have been marginalized because the Xi Jinping's signature, the foreign policy does not sort of emphasize particular role of the MFA. Okay, because there are other ministries in the state bureaucracy, like Ministry of Commerce or other the military, the Ministry of Defense. Okay, their roles were probably within the system. It tends to be more emphasized, right? Okay, so so that kind of sense of, what can I say, that marginalization. Okay, this is not our arguments, but this is some arguments of other previous studies. I think so the wood warrior, the emergence, the sudden or abrupt emergence of wood warrior diplomacy and a particular style of diplomatic language, I think it pretty much represents their sense of marginalization. They need to respond, right, if there is a clear signal from the leadership, right? And then now that they got the signal, very clear signal, right? So because of the Xi Jinping's personal, right, forceful intervention in the foreign affairs, they got the signal. Okay, now things are got clear, right? And then they are kind of overreacting, right? They are reacting very, I think, positively, right? Okay, maybe overreacting to the executive signal. So that's our kind of interpretation, in terms of the relationship between the Xi Jinping, the leadership, and the foreign policy ministry. Okay.
I find it really super interesting, especially when in the paper, and again, we will put the link to the of the paper when this video is uploaded. But I find it like really interesting, especially how you pinpoint again the kind of the failure of the failing grade given by central inspection teams. Chiu's arrival as party secretary of the ministry as a sign that there was an intention from the leadership to reassert, in a way, you can say, ideological political control. And then what you said, right? This seems to be, on the one hand, the elevation of Wang Yi to the Politburo.
That's right.
And of course, state councillor. While maybe the ministry itself is in a different position, which I think is often, right, when we look at Chinese foreign policy, I and a lot of other people, I use bureaucratic politics. So we tend to associate the usual idea, right? Where you sit is where you stand. And so where, like, the minister will make the interest of the ministry. And these two are kind of connected entities. Whereas it seems you suggest, and I find it plausible, right? There's a kind of separation actually between the fate of the institution and the fate of the person. After all, I imagine if you're promoted to the Politburo, you make the interest of the Politburo, not of a ministry.
Absolutely. You're right. Yeah.
I would imagine that. A follow-up question, because the paper, one of the reasons why I really liked the paper was that we had a lot of publications, books, book chapters, articles, dedicated to work for diplomacy. A lot of them are based on case studies, specific events, and so on. And so I really appreciate that you and your course have tried to kind of give a quantitative approach and a view of this phenomenon. And so I was curious, if you can share anything, any, mistake that were made, lesson learned, anything that went well, anything that went wrong with the research, because I think often people think about just the content, but in reality, producing and then publishing, right? We know the peer review process. Such kind of works is far from easy, and so I think also for the audience, it's good to know how this study happened.
Okay, so about the data and methods, okay, I think that's the most important part of this interview and our work, because like gaining the complete set of data, okay, the press conference data, okay, since 1998 actually, okay, so the full set of this press conference data, the briefings. Was the initial driver of this, this whole work, right? So without this data, we cannot. Okay, probably we didn't even start our research. So and then also we like to more systematically understand, okay, the developments of wood warrior diplomacy. Okay, so. First of all, this data set is very, in terms of quality, is good enough. It's quite complete set of, its data it's not only the quantity is good enough, and it's not only that the quality, okay, of the data is good enough to test multiple, number of the text analysis methods. Okay, not only, of course, we are using the sentiment analysis as a baseline. Okay, so. As you know, so text analysis, the quantitative text analysis is basically aiming at reduce the dimensionality, right? So because the text data is a high dimensional data set, it should be structured. Okay, the dimensionality, the dimensions of the text, okay, should be reduced to a simple dimension or a sort of number. It should be changed. Or it should be, converted into numbers, and that's the starting point of our kind of method. Okay, so we use the sentiment analysis, okay, in that process, right, from structuring the raw data, okay, into score, okay, some specific type of number. So and then we apply this sentiment scores to use other methods. Okay, the change point analysis and text regression. Okay, the change point analysis, I think there are some criticisms, but change point analysis, I think, if it is used to kind of the set of data, which is the quality is good. Okay, the one kind of a weakness of this change point analysis is sensitive to noise. Okay, so it tends to over detect, okay, the patterns of the text data. But this data set is good enough, like I said, okay, so to produce a consistent result. So they are not noise. There's not much noise. Of course, there are some issues of processing of the text data, the data set, but so change point analysis is very usefully, okay, is useful in our research purpose. And then finally, text regression. Text regression is not very common, okay, method in political science, but economists economists are using this method often. So we are kind of applying this also method against the sentiment score. So so those are three sentiment analysis as a baseline, okay, to extract scores from the data set, and then we use these scores to two different, okay, two additional text analysis methods, the change point analysis and text regression. I think those are those processes are not very illogical. So I think from our particular interest of research, okay, I think that our choice of methods are it's not bad. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. Caice, did you have questions also you want to ask? No? Yes.
Yes, sorry. So thank you, Professor Lim. So I have one more questions about the workforce diplomacy. I think your data sets are mainly from the like the conference of the ministry Chinese Chinese foreign policy foreign affairs the Ministry of Chinese Foreign Affairs. So I was wondering, there's also like when we talk about workforce diplomacy, we also talk about like those diplomats overseas, like
Exactly.
if you remember the Liu Shayi, also. So have you considered to also take into consideration of those other data, like?
Yeah. So that's fair enough. So, but in this research, we are focusing on the data set of the spokespersons, right? So the press conference data set. This is basically the main source of our research, right? So we didn't use, or we tried to collect the full data of the ambassador's remarks, okay, and other kind of tweets from the the embassies, okay, around the world. But that's that took a lot of time. Okay, so time and effort is quite challenging. So we for now, our decision was that for now we just focused on data set of a press conference. That was our decision. And then, like I said, the data set of press conference is quite good. Okay, maybe you can use. You can so if you try some methods against this data set, you can feel the quality of the data set. Okay, so but our our findings indicate that actually, okay, we actually did additional analysis on the press conference data set. We actually distinguished the individual spokesperson, okay, into during the euphoria diplomacy period. Okay, there were four. Okay, was that Hu Chuning? Okay, the first Hu Chuning, and the second Zhao Lijian, right, and the third is that Wang Wenbin, right? Wang Wenbin, and then Mao Ning, right? And then out of four, okay, spokespersons, okay, who are the most combative with warrior. So our findings, we didn't include this finding in the article, but our additional analysis indicates that so Zhao Lijian and Wang Wenbin, they are the real, with warriors. Okay, so Hu Chuning is kind of ambiguous. She's taking strategically, probably taking an ambiguous position. Okay, of course, since 2019, after the foreign ministry, the whole foreign ministry got the clear message from the leadership. She changed her position. She, like dramatically actually shifted her diplomatic to more combative style. But Hu Chuning is, she was not actually, okay. It turned out that she was not the wolf warrior. I mean, the main wolf warrior. The main wolf warrior is two guys, okay, Wang and Zhao, and then they are from foreign embassies, right? Probably they were strategic, right? So they were kind of incorporated, right? They were brought back, okay, from overseas to deliver some sense of crisis, right? So I mean, some sense of how can I say that, like what they felt, okay, overseas, okay, in the scene, right, of diplomacy. This is what's happening in the scene of diplomacy. Probably they were brought back, right, to the headquarters in Beijing, right, to deliver or to convey those kind of atmosphere or what's happening on the diplomatic scene. And I think that's that's one result of personnel change, right? So interfered by Xi Jinping himself, the party leadership. So those two guys are kind of the most combative. They're real. They're really representing the wolf warrior diplomacy. So I think that means that sort of was that the career patterns or the experience in their careers actually affect their behaviors or their diplomatic their use of language and then their tone in diplomatic and sort of the interactions. Okay.
Excellent. Some future-oriented questions. One is about just speculating, but do you expect a return of the wolf warrior diplomacy, or because essentially you show like there are fluctuations in the patterns, and of course you show this very interesting figure in the paper where you look at the essentially you measure the positive or negative attitude toward the West and the global South, and you see the global South is always treated better, essentially, right? Whereas with the West, you will see these ups and downs and so on. What do you think? It is especially it seems to me there's quite a strong consensus among scholars that today the main constituency of Chinese foreign policy is the global South. There's somewhat less attempt in Beijing to kind of also please the West, as maybe it was the case before. So from this point of view, do you see the wolf warrior diplomacy more like a permanent feature, something that will remain part of Chinese at least narrative or rhetorical approach to diplomacy, and so just something targeted to the West, or maybe just a temporary thing, as you said, maybe just a reaction to pressure from the leadership? This is the first question. And second, what comes after this paper? If you or your co-author will continue working on this topic, or anything else?
Okay, those are excellent questions. Okay, the first question is the future implication, right, of and our findings for Chinese foreign policy. Okay, like you said, I think the Xi Jinping and his administration, the bureaucracy or foreign policy apparatus was focusing on sending messages, positive messages to the global South, right? The developing world, right? Not developed world. So from our kind of observation, the Xi Jinping and his administration had been trying to avoid actually, right? Just touching upon the developed nations, particularly the United States. So they I mean, in other words, they wanted to avoid, fighting, okay, against the United States or other the advanced democracies. Okay, they don't want to get involved in those, like a political bickering, right? Diplomatic sort of, the fights against these countries. But I think, they kind of reconsidered, okay, temporarily, okay. So I mean, as some like you know from their perspective, uh, something they need to respond, okay, sort of cropped up, okay, in late 2018 and 2019. So they changed, kind of their position and put the pressures to the foreign ministry. So that was our interpretation. So, but in the end, I think there was not an attempt to institutionalize, okay, like wolf warrior diplomacy or in the within the Chinese foreign policy apparatus, not only foreign ministry, but also the whole system of foreign policy, okay, making and implementation. In other words, maybe Xi Jinping was not able to institutionalize his individual foreign policy ideas, okay, or agendas, okay. Maybe that kind of interpretation is also possible, but in either terms, okay, in either way, I think the foreign policy apparatus for foreign policy ministry particularly has not been institutionalized, okay, in terms of foreign diplomacy. So basically, they will keep sending positive messages, okay, as and I think they interpreted that sort of policy uh, kind of as the clear or the central message from the leadership. So that's my answer to the first question. The second, what we are going to do, so after this article, is that we are kind of trying to measure more accurately. How can I say the similarity? So we are trying to do some similarity check between the Xi Jinping, his own words, and diplomatic words. So we also collected data set of Xi Jinping speeches. Okay. Well, actually, it's not, Xi Jinping was that. There's a database, right? So now in the official data set, the official database about the Xi Jinping speeches and and also reports of his activities. So we are using this data set and trying to test some similarity, and then how those words, okay, are correlated. Okay, diplomatic words and Xi Jinping's words are correlated in I mean. In the context of the wolf warrior diplomacy. So that was what we are doing for now. So okay, so there are some also interesting findings, but so I'll try to like write an article about that. Okay.
Excellent. I think this would be a quite interesting thing. As you were mentioning, trying to understand the difference between what Xi Jinping says and these are thinking about the work of Sabine Mokri. She also did some work looking at how, I believe, this was when Li Keqiang was still there. So looking at the differences in on how, like, for example, Li, the State Council and others people like talked about same issues, finding that there were differences. There were differences, and also there's also I don't remember if it's her work specifically, but probably yes. Also comparing the same documents written in English or Chinese, and there were differences also in the tone. So I wouldn't be surprising to see if there is a difference between how Xi Jinping talks about foreign policy and how and what the ministry says, probably toward a more international audience. Excellent. So I think we can wrap this up. I think we can close this very interesting discussion here. Thank you so much for your presentation and your insights. Again, for whoever managed to watch this video until the end, I always say, listen to the authors, also read the paper, because there's much more in there. And so again, the paper is very cool. I'm sure that whoever will read it will also find some new ideas for his or her own research. So thank you so much, Professor Lim. Thank you for watching us. And there will be new interviews uploaded very soon. We plan to have at least 4 or 5 over the next 2-3 months. So keep an eye on this, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you.